Welcome to Just an Average Citizen, the podcast that helps to educate, inform, and empower you to make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. So here we are, another budget episode. I know you're probably really tired of it, but I think there's been some really good things that have been developing that I want you to understand that you have been successfully making an impact in that. I have been sitting down trying to figure out the best way to disseminate the information. You can see I've got all my books spread out on that desk. Who knows what I have spread out on that desk? And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to clean it up because I'm about to take it back out to figure out some things because, you know, it's like playing that game with the sticks where you pull out one and then you start to see another place and then you start to see another, but it feels overwhelming where you can't pull it all out because there's no way it's possible. And once you start catching vision for it, you get going and then you have to stop and take a break. And I've looked into city budgets more than I ever thought I would, but shame on me because I should have known more of what was going on in our city for a longer period of time, because if I had known and paid attention, then I would understand so much more now. But part of that we weren't told to do that, right? And so I hope you'll stick with me for just a little bit. I want to highlight some things that I think will matter to you in terms of what has happened in the last few weeks. So basically, I finished up the budget workshop on Monday and a lady showed up and said, I had no idea this was happening today. And it just kind of, part of me inside died because I've been talking about this since January. And it's like, man, if I could just get the word out. So one of the best things you could do is subscribe and share to my podcast and literally share this with your friends. Let them know, invite them to like my page and follow, because the more followers I have, the more I can do stuff on my page. And I haven't promoted enough. So if you don't mind helping me fix that error, I think it would be good, because again, the biggest thing we can do is have conversations about what is going on. And that has been something that's not really been had. There's been frustrations expressed. There's been people who have tried to figure out a way through this, but we haven't had the ability to be consistent, to pay attention long-term as to what's going on enough, I feel like, to make an impact. And so again, I am riding on the coattails of people who've gone before me. I'm not the one who's discovered this, but it's because of what they've done that I'm able to do some more things now to help improve what's going on in our city. So we did have a budget workshop on Monday. You know, we tried to live stream it and the internet was absolutely terrible up at the city hall. So we're going to have to work on that. And thankfully someone noticed that it was bad and they made a comment on it. So I appreciated them watching on a Rumble account. Because I don't know why, probably last spring, it was right after several citizens were reading the vulgarity in the books that were in the public library children's section. And right about that time is when they stopped airing the videos on Facebook Live while it was going on. And I don't know why. I really don't know why. And so you can see that we had if you watch this, I would say watch it. It's a little over 2 hours. You get to hear some good discussions. One of the things that I picked up from March was that the city manager was wanting to take out a certificate of obligation to cover some costs that they weren't sure. They had some cash, but they didn't want to spend the money. They wanted to keep the cash, because I learned something. If the city goes below $30 million in the general fund, then they lose their AA rating or AAA rating or whatever rating it says that they can borrow lots of money and it's all good. So they're trying to keep that untouched with the capital improvements or the minor improvement projects. So what's interesting with the minor improvement project is basically 5%, I believe, of the sales tax goes into this fund to work on projects. And it wasn't always this way. I feel like it started about maybe 2018. I can't remember the exact year. And they were adding $2 million to this fund to work on projects rather than taking out a $2 million certificate of obligation, which is a bond that you don't get to vote on unless you can get 30 people or 10% of the registered voters to sign signatures within 30 days to force it to go to a general election to turn it into a general bond. But most people don't have the time or energy to do that, to stop them from spending money for a certificate of obligation. But we do have a path forward. But most of the time they just write a CO, and that's what a certificate of obligation is called. They write that and they just take care of some things. Now, it was encouraging to hear that they typically try to do certificate of obligations on projects that last more than 20 years, which was good to know. But it's still debt. And when we have the money on hand, it did make sense. So again, I'm going to keep harping that, because now I know we got to the place where their money wasn't where we wanted it to be, but it wasn't because we didn't have the money. It was because it was spent before we got to that conversation. Like, for example, $1 million on a dog park, which I thought was really interesting. I'll get to that in a minute. But so the approach coming to this was to make sure that the city council knew that we did not want them to take out debt. We did not, when you take out debt, it raises your taxes, which means you have to give more money to them. And we already have so many people who don't want to live in the city limits because of the high tax bracket or the high tax rate for this city. We don't need more taxes. So it seems nonsensical for them to say, but it's only $5 more. Well, $5 on the top of a lot is $5 more and a lot. So it seemed that was to me, the only thing we really had negotiating room with. And so thankfully we had a handful of citizens show up and say, hey, I don't want you to raise my taxes. And then, interestingly enough, I don't know if it's coincidentally or interestingly enough, the citizens or the city council then said, hey, I don't think we should do this way. Let's pay for what we can and see what we can wait on to get it done. And again, I don't understand how this works, but it's not my job to always understand. My job is just to explain it and help you understand it. And I probably could have shown more people. It's really fun to see citizens stand up and speak for the first time. It was really hard for me. I remember when I did it in January of 22 was the first time I ever spoke in city council. And I was so nervous, and I'm still nervous. In fact, I can't say things perfectly. I always mess up, and I always mix idioms, and I sound like a big old dork. But I just want to say, if I can do it, then you can do it. So I am just an average citizen. You are just an average citizen. If we step into this, we become more than average citizens, and that makes our city more than average. Okay, so we had quite a few show up. Anyway, so the discussion was really interesting about all the different parts. One of the things that seems to be prevalent in this city issues is that the non-civil workers are not probably paid competitively enough. And then on top of that, because they're government employees, there's a cost of living adjustment that hasn't been really kept up or taken care of, especially to the older civil servants or non-civil servants. So the quandary that was brought up in March was, how do we take care of those who don't make very much, but not give too much to those who already make enough? And I'm glad that conversation kind of changed. And so they were able to give stability pay raises of, I don't know if it's $8,000. I can't remember now off the top of my head, but there were some stability pay raises that they did give to the civil servants because they're having trouble with retention. And so there's several factors that keep people from having retention. One is pay, one is work environment, and another is not having the jobs that people want to work in, which I guess really goes back to pay and environment. And so there were, I believe, 34 positions frozen that are not being fulfilled right now in order to help save money in this upcoming year. And the only thing that was addressed was the police officers. They were wanting to give 5 more police officers on top of the already full amount that they were getting. And it seemed a little bit wasteful because as it was presented in council, there's never been a class, but maybe 1 or 2 classes for the entire last few, I would say probably a couple decades, that have actually overshot how many people from the academy were able to come in, and they had more than they needed to hire. And so they took a chance during a very poor fiscal year and said, hey, we've never really done this very much, but this year, even though we don't have money, we're going to count on those officers needing to get employment. And then what happens is, and part of it is they can't really fund positions unless it's through taxes. And so they have to do this once a year. So I do understand it, but it just seemed a little bit wasteful. And so I do have to make some corrections. There's been things I've said. I don't know who I've talked to or what I've said, but at the end, they talked about cutting to keep taxes from raising. This is really interesting. It's showing on the screen right now. I do want to show this. I thought it was interesting. Our revenues. Okay, that's our revenues. I'll wait till we get to our expenditures. Our general fund is 38% of our total revenues. It's interesting how we get revenue from debt service, but that doesn't make sense. But that's another conversation. Okay, expenditures. we spend safety. Where is it? Oh, no, I see it didn't go. Let me back up a little. Okay, so and there's our revenues. I thought it was interesting. We spend more on debt service than we do on our streets. However, I've learned more about the streets because the more information, then you can look through all the stuff that you have in front of you to be able to explain it. So yes, our expenditures 3% and our debt services are 5%. Okay, so they worked on improving the pay quality for the non-civil employees. The civil employees are like police and fire, and they have meet and confer groups that help them really push to get all the extra benefits they need. And then they talked about stability pay, but they were able to reduce $1.3 million. I'm sorry, no, take that back. $800,000 from the budget so that they did not have to raise taxes 2 cents, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I was pleased that instead of taking out a certificate of obligation for $7.5 million, we only took it out for, I think, maybe we took it out for the ramp. We're going to take it out for the ramp and for the microwave radio, which is probably $2.5 million. So you got to take your wins where you can, because it wasn't like they were going to come completely over and say no debts. But you know, it's a hard thing to know how to navigate through this. But I will say, if there's one meeting that you can attend all year long for the city council, it is the workshop. So the workshop retreat where they discuss things happens in March typically. And then they talk about the budget, the actual budget, in July. And those are two important times because you get to listen and hear what they're going to talk about in March. And then you get to actually have chances to respond. So what's interesting is last year I went to the workshop and left before lunch because I didn't know how long it was going to go. And I've never committed that long to any kind of meeting before in my life. On purpose. And so I missed the part where they had a public hearing afterwards. So I was pleasantly surprised when we actually got to have some time to comment. And I appreciate Councilman Yates informing me when I could come up and talk. And then they explained to me that I could talk about whatever I wanted to. However, this was for this year or for the upcoming year. Anyway, I appreciated that. And I appreciate just the chance to talk about some things, because there is no place where you can actually talk to councilmen about issues in that setting except at a city council meeting. So the reason why those two meetings are important to listen to come to, or if you can't come, to watch them, because it really gives you a feel for what's going on. For example, because I listened in March, because there was another discussion in June, and then when it happened in July, there was another expense brought to us, which was another $750,000 to $1 million to improve the fire station parking lot for 2 fire stations. 4 of them need it, but 2 are at a really bad level. Like they can't even hardly function anymore in these, and which is bad for safety. And I questioned, why is it from July 4th, when this document was printed, the proposed budget, which you can download on your own, or you at least have to look at, the proposed budget and the proposed budget and this budget meeting, how this new expense of $1 million came up. And the city manager informed me that, well, it wasn't that they didn't know about it. They just didn't present the information because they didn't have the numbers until this meeting. And again, regardless, there had to be some indication that the fire station, 2 fire stations, were going to need to have their parking lots resurfaced. And that was not ever a conversation. Again, I don't know how much detail they're supposed to give, because this is only my second time at this rodeo, but it just didn't make sense to me that we could let our fire stations get to a place where they have no regard but to use, or no ability but to use the word catastrophic to describe the surfaces that they're having to work on. And I think anytime someone says my situation is catastrophic, it means it's been neglected for far too long. And that has been a theme that I've seen consistently, that things are neglected in our city. And it's like we get to this place where it's like, oh no, everything's falling apart. We've got to fix it. Oh no, we have no money. Okay, let's take out a loan. Let's vote on this. You know, guys, we need a fire station. Let's vote on this. Okay, but we'll pass the dog park. We'll pass this. We'll pass that. But okay, now vote on the things that are really important. And what's interesting is just paying attention to details. Like I just recently heard that in 2020, it was presented to the Parks and Recreation Board that the recreation buildings were at the end of life. Okay, so 2020 to 2024 or 2023, how much money was saved to start working towards the rec centers? Absolutely nothing. And that's why you voted on it as a bond, because you were told it was end of life. But the city knew it was at end of life for over 3 years. who knows even how much longer than that. And to have nothing to save up, nothing in these general fund budgets. The fund budgets are meant for us to save up and be prepared for costs that are coming. And so it doesn't make sense. And that was something interesting, but also something that I did mention at the budget workshop, the budget workshop on Monday, was that we knew that the Abilene Heritage Square was building a facility that was going to allow us to house our library for 3 years, I would think, maybe even more. Sorry, I take that back. Actually, I discovered in my notes, because I take way too many notes, that they knew about it as early as 2016. And that's being generous. I mean, they were talking about doing this building in 2016. And I remember that it was supposed to be even finished by January of last year. And so it really shocked me. Like, they were supposed to have finished construction in January of last year. And so it shocked me at the March retreat when, or maybe it was June, I can't remember which one, Robert Hanna, the city manager, said, we had no idea. This $3 million just kind of jumped up on us because we had no idea it was going to be ready. And I'm like, I've been barely paying attention, and I knew that this is actually a year or two behind schedule. So how are you telling me that it is shocking that we need to get this money together? We got to take out a loan fast. Thankfully, the city council decided to, and the mayor decided to pay for that with the cash we had on hand. It's like furniture and stuff. And what's crazy is, they've been on hold in that city library for several years waiting on this to upgrade. So like, things are falling apart at the city library downtown because they've been waiting on this. And so to say, I'm not prepared, again, I don't know who is promoting this philosophy of we don't save, we don't prepare, we just kind of say, oh no, help, Mayday, Mayday, and hope we get the money and we get the funding. It just doesn't make sense to me. Okay, so that was interesting. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, and I have a hard time sometimes finding it, I've been a part of several meetings, so I've seen how things go. It's very rare that they call an executive session that's not scheduled. And so one of the things that I noticed, I think we're about here, they took a break about 10:30. Okay, so what's interesting is I've been paying attention for quite a while on some of this stuff. So I feel like I know some things. I don't know all the details, but I know the processes. So when June 11th came and they quickly voted on the $1 million dog park, 6-1, and said, let's do it. Well, the contract was signed and it was actually sent out pretty quickly, and all the materials were purchased and work had already moved forward in that direction, so that when it was brought up at this council meeting, the fact that the restrooms cost almost $500,000, it was like, hey, can we visit this? And they were like, well, we've already ordered stuff, so it really won't work. And it's like, man, I've never seen city work so fast to order stuff. And so the Councilman Reagan, Reagan asked the question about it, and here they are taking their little break, and then, it jumps back. So Councilman Reagan asked the question of revisiting taking off the restrooms for this dog park. And they had just come back from a break, and Councilman Reagan had 2 questions to ask, or he hadn't finished asking his questions. So Mayor Hurt was like, Councilman Reagan, did you finish asking your questions? And he's like, okay, great, thanks. So here they are, they're walking away to take a break, and then they jump back in. And I swear I've watched this like 3 times, and it looks like they skipped it over. So what happened was Reagan starts asking the questions about the dog parks again. Well, Mayor Hurt was not having any of it, and I don't understand why. He slammed that gavel. Most of us in the room jumped, and they said executive session, and he stormed out, and there he goes. He's storming out. So, okay, I didn't miss it. He's storming out, and they left for executive session for about 5 minutes. They came back in, and Reagan asked this question again, clearly with no direction for any further discussion, and they moved on. And I will just say it was very, very alarming, the emotion that cannot be conveyed in this situation. But I'll be curious to be a fly on the wall in that executive session to see what was actually said. So it wasn't without a little bit of drama. So I think that's the most exciting thing I can tell you. One of the things that I've noticed is they talked about the street maintenance fund. And I think this is something that the citizens have a hard time understanding, because we all voted, or the citizens voted to do a fee on the utility bills so that they would collect money to pay for the streets. And I have looked through all the books. I've added all the street maintenance fees. I have 6 years of budgets printed out, and I'm really weird and twisted and wish I had a couple more. But I went through and compared all the fees that were actual fees that they collected. And the city manager told us we spent $130 million in 5 years, and I can't find about 50 million. So it's really interesting how vague things are. And that's one of the things I mentioned. The transparency is lacking, so that it's hard for us to know what we should know and hard for us to know what we're actually right about, because it's like we're always told, well, you don't know everything. And it's like, well, it's impossible for us to know because you don't tell us. So I just thought that was really interesting. So when I find that $50 million to account for the last 5 years, I'll let you know. But right now it seems that there's some confusion about how much money they say we spent versus how much I can actually see in the completed budgets. And it's not like it's hidden somewhere. But one of the things that I'll have to note is that in this year's proposed budget, of all the transfers in and all the transfers out, there's very rarely any information telling you where it's going. But on the street maintenance fee, it is very clear that that shows that they transferred out to the street project fund. What that fund is, I have no idea, because it's not in the budget anywhere. I've never heard of it. I've never seen this project fund. It's like things are always changing, so you can't compare from one year to year. Like, for example, and in one budget back, I think in 2019, it said contributions from DCOA to the street maintenance fund. Well, then 2 years later, it changed just to contributions. So again, it's like there's this appearance of not wanting to be transparent that I think causes a lot of frustration. But I want to let you know, I do think you made a difference. I do think if you've reached out to your councilman, that they heard what you had to say and they're listening. And we've got to do a better job of listening and using our voices. But part of that is we have to know what's going on, so that we're not just a loud clanging cymbal in their ears, but we're actually bringing information that helps them know how to function and to respond appropriately. So I think it was a great meeting. I enjoyed it. I enjoy knowing more about things, so that when we're discussing things, it's important. And so there's more that's going to come ahead. But I think for now, we have a budget meeting. They said it was going to be the 4th meeting of August, but I'll double check to make sure which actual meeting that is going to be, where they'll approve the budget and then they'll actually adopt it in October. And what's fun about the next few meetings in the city council over the next few months is they'll be passing budgets where the city does contribute to stuff. So let's start paying attention to the budgets. That's how I started understanding how the CAF has or the Cultural Arts Affairs, the Abilene Cultural Affairs Council, it has a relationship with the city. These are the things I started to learn because I just started paying attention to the consent agenda and those things that are in it. That's the problem. If you don't pay attention, things on the consent agenda go through, you don't know what it is, and you're like, how did that happen? And it happened right under your nose. You just didn't know to look. So I've tried to keep this less than 30 minutes. I've been successful for the most part. I'm very proud of myself, but keep watching. There's going to be more interaction. There's going to be more stuff going on, sadly, on the Facebook page that I have. But as much as I can put it on Rumble, I will, because I know not all of my listeners are on social media, and I think that we've got to work between the two. But I really appreciate the encouragement. I appreciate everyone participating and starting to pay attention more, because while I know that we're still not paying attention enough, we're doing more than we ever have. And to me, that is a measure of success. So let's keep at it, because I want to make sure that you know how to be educated, informed on how you can make an impact in Abilene and the Big Country. Until next time.